unscripted.
Exclusive video shows Stefanko handcuffed and heading into the police station shortly after the U.S. Marshals, Northern Ohio Violent Fugitive Task Force, and New Franklin police picked her up following a traffic stop. Detective Michael Hitchings believes Stefanko got away with murder for 7 years until now.
I don't know. I don't know how you could live with that. Yeah, it's something that most of us couldn't think of.
In 2012, 25-year-old Ashley Biggs, who was working as a Domino's delivery driver, was lured to a business on West Turkeyfoot Lake Road after a bogus pizza order. She was ambushed by her former boyfriend, Chad Cobb, who strangled Bibbs and stuffed her body in the back seat of her car, which was abandoned in a Wayne County cornfield. He's serving life in prison. But now Stefanko, who was married to Cobb at the time of the crime, is facing multiple charges. Police say they have new evidence that it was Stefanko who called in the fake pizza order.
And she chose to go along with him on this. She's just as guilty.
Prior to the killing, Biggs and Cobb were locked in a bitter custody dispute over a girl they had together. Ashley's family left devastated by the murder, but relieved a second person has been charged.
The truth is going to come out about, the whole situation.
This is the next big trial here on Court TV. Jury selection scheduled for Friday. And there is one huge issue in this case, and it involves Chad Cobb, right? This is Erica Stefanko's now ex-husband, who is supposed to be a witness for prosecutors against her. So there were some intense arguments in a hearing all about, can he testify against her? And if so, what can he testify to? Let's take a look.
Let me ask you this, Attorney LaPrenzi, as it relates to Mr. Cobb. Essentially, what would be a brief summary of his testimony against this current defendant?
Well, Your Honor, his testimony would be what he did. So he would be testifying about the crimes he committed. As the court knows, he is serving life without parole.
Okay.
He pled guilty to all the similar counts as Mr. Stefanko is facing aggravated murder, being the biggest one. So he would be testifying as to what the crimes were. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, we are proceeding on a complicity theory on the case. So him indicating what he did would be important. He will then indicate the location of Ms. Cobb during the events that happened that night and that day, I guess. And also some of the statements that were made in presence of a third party, plus any of the jail calls that they may have had together.
Is he going to provide any testimony against this defendant as it relates to that particular evening and that call made to Domino's?
Yes, he will be testifying that she placed the call, that she was with him when he bought, and they together went to Walmart, bought the minutes for that phone, because it was a phone that had minutes on it and you had to load the minutes. We have video of that also. He will be testifying as to the call that was placed and where they went after the murder, because as you know, she was found in Wayne County, and obviously there was transportation issues because he transported Ashley Biggs, the victim in this case, in her own car. He took her to a very remote location, and Ms. Stefanko then picked him up. And he's going to testify as to the actions of where she was when he was picked up. It's going to be in the context of, what did you do next? I went and dropped her body here. Who picked you up? Ms. Stefanko.
This is going to be an unreal moment if you think about it, but you know what? They were married. Is there some sort of spousal privilege that's going to prevent some of this testimony from coming in? Let's bring in Court TV anchor Julie Grant, as I always say, our in-house law professor. All right.
You're too kind, my friend.
Julie, is this an issue now, this spousal privilege?
This is really interesting stuff, Vinny. So in Ohio, there are two types of spousal privilege. There are spousal incompetency privileges and marital privileges. And with spousal incompetency, the key is the couple has to be married at the time of the trial. So we know that cannot apply here because Stefanko and Cobb are now divorced. They divorced once he went off to prison. I believe it was around 2017. So the one that the court will have to focus on here is the marital privilege. And what that involves are confidential communications between spouses during the time of the marriage. And the issue is one spouse testifying against another who is the party to the case. So here we have Stefanko, who's the party to the case. She's the defendant. Cobb would be the holder of that privilege. It would be his privilege to assert. And what's tricky here, Vinny, and it's really giving us an indication that he probably is going to go ahead and testify, is that he was the one who came forward to detectives in 2017. He's expressed willingness to these prosecutors to testify remotely in this case. But if he does appear, let's say he appears for the trial, the state calls him as a witness, what the court indicated she will do is that the judge will be advising him of not only his Fifth Amendment right, okay, not to testify and incriminate himself, but also that spousal marital privilege. So she'll go through a colloquy with him on that and make sure he understands he doesn't have to give that testimony. And the court may even hold a hearing outside of the jury's presence on that, Vinny, because this is really a big key to this case. I mean, we understand he's absolutely critical, especially with the state proceeding on that theory of accomplice liability. So that is huge, and we're waiting for the big ruling on that when the time comes. But in the meantime, there was another really big issue that was already settled, and that was whether or not some jail calls between Erica Stefanko and Mr. Cobb can come in. Now, these were recorded back in June 2012 to March of 2013. That was a period where he was incarcerated, and they spoke. Let's take a little bit of a listen to some of the arguments that were raised during that hearing now.
Is it your position that as jail calls say, and an inmate's looking at it, and they announce it over the audio program that they're being recorded, your position is that's subject to spousal privilege?
Until the court rules otherwise, Your Honor, yes.
Okay. This court or another court?
Your court.
Attorney LaPrenzi, what's your position on that?
We agree with the court. The fact that there's no expectation of privacy and it is announced that they are not, that they're being recorded and it's not private.
Okay, those phone calls will come in.
Excellent legal call there by Her Honor, because of course when you think about it, there is the third party. That would be the recording of it. Anyone else at the jail could be hearing that. It's announced that it's recorded, so clearly there's no expectation of privacy. We're not talking about confidential communications you would think of between a husband and a wife, Vinny. So good call there, and we'll wait to see what happens with the rest of the testimony and if he does assert that privilege.
There's another huge issue in this case, and it involves really what this case is all about. Ultimately, it's that little girl who was 7 at the time that her mom was murdered and who was in the middle of this custody battle. She's now 15, and there's a big issue about whether or not she will be able to testify and what she'll be able to say. Let's take a listen.
As it relates to statements made in front of that minor child, Attorney LaPrenzi, what is your understanding as to the nature of those statements made by Stefanko to Cobb in general?
She would also be considered the third person in the conversation for Chad Cobb, so that takes it outside of spousal privilege also. The one issue we would have to determine the third person would have to be a competent individual, so you might have to discuss or go through competency with the child, but she's 15 now. And we can discuss that at the time. She made statements to her counselor, I believe, indicating what she had heard. So we believe for those, that would be the nature of those statements.
Okay, Attorney O'Brien, you haven't filed a motion to exclude her testimony based on competency, have you?
No, Your Honor, but I would like leave to. My argument would be that at the time she supposedly heard these statements, that she was approximately 7 years old.
Yeah, that's young. I mean, 7 is young, but we have seen children like that testify. She's now 15 and has to recall things from 8 years ago, Julie.
Right, exactly. And she's really going to be critical here because when you think about the arguments we can anticipate the defense making that, look, this may be a jilted ex-spouse coming forward to police trying to implicate his ex-wife because he's bitter, because he's locked up for the rest of his life. And then you have the independent witness who is Erica Stefanko's former stepdaughter. She is the one said to have witnessed Erica Stefanko placing that call for the Domino's pizza delivery. That's according to investigators. And also, Vinny, the other big thing she can provide is that context of what was going on with the relationship between her mother, Ashley Biggs, who was the murder victim in this case, and Mr. Cobb, her dad. So what was going on with them at the time? It was a very bitter custody dispute. So she can provide that context. And we talked a little bit about Marcy's Law recently on Court TV, and this is really becoming a key to what they're asking right now with this witness, Vinny, is they want her to be able to testify remotely because of COVID-19 in an abundance of caution to try to keep her as safe as possible. And also because, according to counsel, she is gravely afraid of the defendant based on how she was treated when she was living with her, and Erica Stefanko was her stepmother, and because she's considered a victim under Marcy's Law because she was traumatized and affected by what happened to her mother. The court's going to have to make a ruling on that motion, whether she can testify remotely. And of course, the fact that she's 15 at the time, we could certainly see the judge granting that motion and allowing her to testify remotely as she is a minor child.
You have to feel so bad for her. I mean, it's tough enough being a child of divorce, but then you put the murder and then you put a trial. It's too much. Julie Grant, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinny.